This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
Stuff. Got a lot of it to talk about today. The notes are endless. Countless pages of notes I have typed up here. No, honestly, it's really not that much. No, it's going to be a semi-normal Friday show this week. No swerves this time, I promise. We're not throwing in the random pay-per-view rundown this time. Part of my pre-planning last week that just went completely out the window when I realized Retro Raw wasn't going to be a thing on Monday. We have two classic shows we're going to talk about today, in addition to Dynamite. But I also wanted to carve out some time at some point to talk about this Collision show that's happening on Saturday. Because there are a few things I wanted to sort of address before we actually see that show. Things that we'll probably want to keep in mind as we see the show progress. Or digress, depending on how you view it. Can't digress much worse than they are with Dynamite in the last 8 to 9 months. I'm trying so hard to find in lead-in transitions at this point. I used to be better at it. Until I just stopped caring, I guess. I'm dying on the vine here, folks. Literally grasping at straws to try and get through this one. Kind of like how I'm grasping at straws to find anything enjoyable to talk about with Dynamite. They don't call it Slim Pickens for nothing. God almighty, this show. It's just soothing enough to send a baby into a spitting feat of rage. I would highly recommend you not show this program to any child under the age of 5, much less you plan on living them a life of ecstasy and peace. The brain rot that comes with trying to watch this show is mesmerizing at times. They should use it for science. A before and after lab test of those that experienced AEW Dynamite in the last 4 years. Images before the Dynamite debut to where we are now in 2023. And you see before pictures where everybody looks totally normal and happy. And then the after pictures, they look like those people in the cigarette commercials where their hair's falling out. They got wrinkles all over their faces. Just totally dejected and lifeless. That's about where I am with this show at this point. So, well, yeah. Remember when we were talking about how soon they should possibly consider doing Adam Cole versus MJF? Seeing as how they literally just teased the idea of doing the feud a week ago. So yeah, they did the match with approximately 1 week's build because, I don't know, because they were desperate for a ratings pop and figured, fuck it, let's just hotshot the match on free TV. And again, it's one of those tournament eliminator dealia bobs that I still don't think they've ever properly explained. How does it work? Why is it called a tournament eliminator? How do you have a tournament with only 2 participants? No idea. But we all know Tony loves to gimmick things up for no rational reason. Everything has to have a title or a theme. But that was honestly the least of our worries here. You know, I watched this match. Didn't get up to leave and go to the bathroom at any point. Didn't skip over anything. Didn't even really take a whole lot of notes about it. I just kind of sat back and observed. I mean, it honestly never even occurred to me last week when they literally just threw up a graphic for this match and said it was happening this week. I never even thought twice about it. I was like, oh, okay. That sounds kind of rushed. Figured that you maybe could have milked the tension a little more with these two and tried to develop a couple more angles before he just nosedived right into doing the first match on free television. That was what I thought before I actually saw the match. Now that I've seen it, yeah, you know, maybe hot-shotting it a week later wasn't such a bad idea after all. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the minority, maybe not. Maybe I'm just overly jaded at this point as a wrestling fan. Maybe I just can't be pleased no matter how hard they try. I thought this match fucking sucked. Moreover, let me narrowly draw back on that statement for a moment. I'll try to be more explicit. I thought Adam Cole sucked in this match. You know, the entire time I'm watching him here, you got MJF overcompensating in so many ways, to the point where he was almost being too overly heat-seeking with the crowd, slowing things down to almost too much of a grind. Glacially slow at times. And the longer the match went, the more obvious it was that Cole was either hurt or fatigued or just, I don't know, out of his element entirely. I was almost kind of uneasy trying to watch this. I mean, it already got off to a moderately slow start to begin with, and normally that's fine if the goal is to pick up the energy as the match goes, you know, let the babyface take his time firing back and try to rally up the fans. This match seemed to have the polar opposite effect. The longer it went, the more quiet and lackluster the crowd got. And again, man, I don't know what the fuck was going on with Adam Cole here, but he just looked... He looked like shit. I'm sorry. At this stage, I don't know how else to sugarcoat it without being exceedingly blunt. The conversations about his frail physique are always going to be the central focus for a lot of people. And you know, here's the thing. You're always going to have the weirdos out there that get all bent out of shape about the people that body shame others. Chances are those same people are probably extraordinarily out of shape themselves, so they have no real defense mechanism for it. They've also probably never seen the inside of a gym in their entire life either. But even if we try to analyze the size thing objectively, just remove all the negative connotations associated with calling out Cole's body. On an objective level, you cannot argue that Cole being in his current condition is helping his ring work. Did you see the bumps he was taking? Did you see the spot where he tried to hold MJF up in a fireman's carry and he went to drop him over his knee and then his leg just completely buckled from underneath him? How in the fuck that didn't cause any ligament damage, I will never know. There were large periods here where he was down on the mat and Bryce was hovering over him and you could audibly hear Cole talking to him. like covering up certain parts of his body and being really slow to respond to things. The rope running, my God, the rope running. Looked like he had 50-pound chains wrapped around both of his ankles. He was running so goddamn slow. Was I just seeing things? Or was I watching this on a whole different planet from everybody else? Or was it basically a tale of two stories here? You had MJF basically trying to carry the entire workload, and Adam Cole couldn't keep up. That's the message I got out of it. The main takeaway I got was MJF was trying desperately to have a match with a guy that, given his current bodily state, probably should not be wrestling right now. I think we've basically learned that the Adam Cole experiment hasn't worked. His in-ring comeback just hasn't hit home. His matches are worse now than they were during his first run. I mean, the first go-around, Cole was unfortunately linked up with having to wrestle the dregs of society, but he could at least do some stuff. Now he's back and healed up from injuries, supposedly. His matches are worse now than they were when he was fucking jobbing out to Orange Cassidy. I don't know, man. I was getting some really ominous flashbacks here. There are certain guys whose ring style I've seen evolve over the years, and sometimes it hasn't been for the better. There are guys that have come back from serious injuries following surgeries, and they were just never the same in the ring again. Two guys that immediately come to mind for me are guys like Randy Orton and Edge. Those guys had some real career-threatening injuries over a decade ago, and you could even tell when they came back and started wrestling again, they were never back on that level they were prior. For guys like Orton, it was really obvious. That guy used to do like missile drop kicks off the top rope, and it used to look so fluid. I don't think I ever remember seeing Orton do a missile drop kick again when he came back from that rotator cuff tear. Edge, kind of the same deal. That guy had some serious shoulder and arm work done right at the tail end of the Attitude Era, and he was significantly less agile when he came back from surgery. When was that? Like mid-2003, 2004? Adam Cole, man. I mean, on the one hand, you really got to feel for the guy because of everything surrounding the concussions and the labrum tear and the total body breakdown in the last year. But between the ring rust and the health and the fact that he's just not resonating in the ring like he used to, there's just something not clicking with him. And you know, it could be on his end that he's just being a little tentative. But I don't know. I'm just not getting the Adam Cole vibe like I used to. But here's the amazing thing. People still really want to love him. You can audibly hear the crowd get behind Cole as a babyface. Not saying they should go against the grain and try to fight the reactions by turning him heel again. But this Adam Cole run is not doing anybody any favors. Between the Jericho stuff and now this, even MJF couldn't get a salvageable match out of the guy. And again, am I being too harsh? Maybe. I'm not going to apologize for such. I stand by what I said. But this wasn't a good match at all. And I think a lot of that blame goes on Adam Cole. It was plotting and trudging even for an MJF match. And I know that's going to make me sound like a hypocrite for all the bitching and moaning I do about guys in this company doing nothing but cartwheels and backflips through shards of ass glass every week. But this didn't have any energy or life to it. They tried to smoke and mirrors things with the ref bump spots and the usual MJF shenanigans. Some of it worked. The table bump out to the floor was retarded because Bryce Remsburg did the usual, I'm going to take 9 months to count to fucking 10. It's ridiculous to think a human being could even possibly count that slow, but every AEW official does it. 1, 2, 3. Fuck off. Seriously. Could have gone to In-N-Out Burger and back by the time you count to 10. You numbskull. And there's stuff at the end where MJF tried to channel the Eddie Guerrero spot with the belt, ends up throwing it at Cole so Bryce could catch him in the act, but Bryce ends up falling over again. So after MJF takes the bump and Cole's standing there with the title, he looks over at Bryce and realizes he's fucked. So then Cole hit him with the belt. Could have been a clever finish idea if they actually would have taken it home there. But of course, MJF had to kick out so they could do more stuff. Just as long as you get past the stupidity of Cole blatantly standing there with the belt for an entire millennium while Bryce is stirring to his feet. Did never stop to think, maybe I should try to drop this thing so Bryce doesn't catch me. Never crossed his mind. Instead, he just stood there cradling the belt and watched as Bryce bumbled around like a drunken sailor. And of course, they went with the classic, oh, there's a time limit to this match finish? Or honestly, I don't even know if they tapered it down to an entire 30 minutes or not. The match seemed like it went on about twice that length. But yeah, they did a 30-minute time limit expiration. Conveniently at the point where Cole basically had a 2 3/4 count on MJF. Seemed like oddly expedient timing for Cole to hit his finish on MJF, and right as Bryce is dropping his hand for the 3 count, that's when the timekeeper rings the bell to end the match. And of course, the fans naturally boo it. And as Cole gets on the microphone and tells MJF 5 more minutes, Max scurries out of the ring like a coward and walks off with the belt. And the fans shit on the segment even more. I mean, fine, whatever. We could sit here and nitpick the finish until we're blue in the face, but again, that's honestly the last thing we ought to be concerned about right now. The simple fact that they did the 30-minute draw here is making me think they're about to set up another fucking hour Broadway between these guys on pay-per-view. Because, right, if we already didn't determine that Adam Cole doesn't have the ring cardio to do at least a 30-minute match, obviously that means he's ready to go an hour. Not saying that's what they'll end up doing, but I mean, isn't this traditionally how you wind up setting up Iron Man matches in wrestling? I don't know why we need to see MJF in another 60-minute title match when he literally just did one with Bryan Danielson on pay-per-view less than 3 months ago. But again, we all know how Tony gets off on regurgitating the same shit over and over again. Whether it's battle royals or tournaments or trios matches. Guess the newest fix is going to be the 60-minute Ironmans, brother. And I'll tell you what, man. After seeing these guys for 30 minutes, I don't know if I can stomach seeing them go another 30. I don't really have any desire to see this match ever again. Never thought that day would come where I would say that about an MJF match, but there's always an exception to the rule. And I think we found it. And boy, I'll tell you, after that opening fiasco, what I desperately needed at this point was another picker-upper. And getting that in the form of CM Punk in a video package, talking about how he's got a lot of unfinished business to settle, things he needs to get off his chest. And now he doesn't know what he's going to say or do until he gets that microphone in hand. Tell you what, man, if there's one guy that knows how to command attention in a room, it's Punk. I can't wait to see what the hell happens this Saturday in Chicago. AEW Collision, CM Punk unhinged. Let's do it, baby. Let's open up Pandora's box. Let's have him call out the empty-headed dipshit again. Or call out the soy boy beta bucks. Let him have it. Let's have ourselves a good old-fashioned Pier 6 brawl on the pilot episode of Collision. That'd be the most legendary TV debut in wrestling history. Part of me is looking forward to see what happens. The other part, well, again, there's always the skeptic in me. You know, it's hard to eliminate that demon after years and years of being jerked around as a fan of this sport. Speaking of jerks, guess who's back? It's, well, it's really not that exciting, all things considered. I am leaving you in suspense over virtually nothing. Sammy Guevara's back. Yeah, I know. Got about as much of a dud reaction as that dud-colored shit brown shirt he had on. It almost kind of perfectly matched his promo work here with Renee Paquette. The epitome of somebody riding on Cloud 9 right now in AEW. Picking up one of the biggest paychecks on the roster to be literally nothing of use. Actually, who am I kidding? That's like 50% of the people that are working for this company. So Sammy, he said some words. He tried to be a babyface. It failed. He got wutted. He tried to claim that he was going to hold the AEW World Championship alongside his new baby girl. And the people booed. And then Darby interrupted to try and insinuate that Sammy is starting to warm up to a lot of the fans again. That was also a bold-faced lie. But of course, the big talking head here was Darby asking whether or not Sammy was going to continue to live in Jericho's shadow. And like a fucking wizard, alakazam, bitch. On cue, here comes Jericho. Surprisingly unaccompanied by his cronies this time. So I presume this was serious Chris Jericho, as opposed to whatever incarnation that Jericho has been on in the last 29-something days. I mean, he's only got like 7 unique personalities going on at a given time. And now him and Guevara are having a little back and forth. Jericho's throwing snide, underhanded comments at Sammy about how if he would have called him when Sammy was getting ready to go after the AEW World title, he would be standing here right now holding the belt. Guevara tells Jericho that if Jericho called him, he might have been able to give him some pointers to help beat Adam Cole instead of losing to him twice. And, well, the gist of this was them setting up a tag program. Lay Sex Gods, I guess that was what their team was called prior, versus Darby and Sting. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that little caveat here. Sting came out to confront Jericho. Apparently this being the first time these guys have ever faced off in the ring together, which I find that incredibly hard to believe. All those years they spent together in WCW, you're telling me they were never in the same ring together one time? I mean, I can neither confirm nor deny. I'd have to go back and watch some of those Nitro clips, but it seems a bit odd to think they never would have actually met up in the same ring together, even if it was just in passing. In any case, Tony Schiavone was excited to see Sting. For the rest of us, it was one of those read the room moments where you can see Sting walking down the aisleway, probably dying on the inside, realizing he's walking right into the vortex of suck that is Chris Jericho. Poor sap. He knows what's coming. Sting's a smart man. He knows of the impending doom. We'll see how Jericho manages his creative liberty on this one. I'm predicting exploding baseball bats that project fireballs. Wouldn't even put it past a guy like Jericho at this point to come up with that idea. And honestly, I hate to even say this, I wouldn't put it past Sting to go along with it. That guy is just there to pick up a paycheck. That guy's long since given up. Kind of like how I gave up trying to sit through this 8-man debauchery with Sting, Darby, Keith Lee, and the company mascot facing off with whatever this mogul affiliates group is called. Swerve Strickland, Brian Cage, and 2 random job guys that I would never be able to pick out of a police lineup. I barely even recognize Cage with the face paint on. I got approximately 30 seconds into this thing when I saw Darby and Cassidy doing stereo topes out to the floor. I saw what appeared to be about 9 different things going on. I saw Darby take out 2 of the heels on the floor. The one guy with the tattoos just sort of walked past the camera and disappeared. And meanwhile, Brian Cage is standing there ragdolling Cassidy in a standing bear hug. Just everybody being on totally separate pages and having no idea what the fuck's going on. So, typical outlaw indie wrestling on an AEW show. What else is new? From that point, they went on for like another minute before they went to picture-in-picture. At which point I said, fuck it, I'm going to the finish. I don't care. And I fast-forwarded to the part where Sting nearly took out Keith Lee in the corner with his own ass. He fired back on Cage very briefly, and when Cage went to scoop him up for an F5, Cassidy gave him the Superman punch, and then Sting hit the Scorpion Death Drop on Cage for the 3. Just making sure we put over that young generation of talent. I mean, they're all going to need the rub eventually. And Sting definitely needed that win here, so props to them. I mean, he's probably got the most future longevity out of everybody involved here. Everyone else is over the hill and broken down. Sting, though, not that guy. That guy's got a bright future ahead of him. Definitely the right call letting him score the pin. So from there, a couple small things I skipped over here until that brought us to this Wardlow TNT Open Challenge. An open challenge that was apparently issued off camera and was never brought to our attention until the moment Wardlow was jump attacked in the aisleway by none other than Jake Hager. And you can imagine the exhilaration that overcame me. Tingles and chills running down my spine at the idea of the magic that was about to happen. This instant 5-star classic in the making. The one-on-one title match between Wardlow and Jake fucking Hager. Also, what was apparently a rubber match dating back to a series of matches these guys had a couple years back that nobody remembers nor gives a fuck about because see one of the parties involved in the form of Jake fucking Hager. Anyway, they had the match. It sucked. They came back from break. They did an angle on the floor where Matty Mini Dick Menard and Angie Parker tried to confront Arn. And then he pulled out his magic Glock, which apparently summoned the force of his son Brock to make the save. And it was so memorable, I did not even recognize who it was that came out to run the heels off until the announcers pointed it out. They said it was Brock Anderson. I just took their word for it. I mean, he was out there for less than 8 seconds. So if you missed it, they didn't make it very apparent. And then back in the ring, they did some more stuff for a couple minutes. One spot which included Wardlow doing a totally superfluous dive over the top rope onto Hager. I'm surprised he didn't shatter his ankle on the landing. And then he hit a swanton like 15 seconds later, ended up pinning Hager after 2 power bombs. And because we live in the world of AEW, where they hired people to run production that have no idea how to do their jobs correctly, Christian Cage and Luchasaurus showed up on the big screen afterwards to do a promo, wherein the audio was muted for more than half the dialogue. And when they finally got the audio working, I couldn't hear it anyway because the volume was too low. AEW in a nutshell, folks. So I have no idea what Christian said here. I did think, though, only in Tony's philosophy of booking would he decide to continue the Christian Wardlow feud after we literally just saw these guys have a car wreck ladder match on pay-per-view wherein the babyface won clean. Only in Tony's ADHD pea brain would that make sense. Babyface wins in decisive fashion. The feud must continue. So get ready for that. What's left for them to do? Run each other over with fucking buses? Set each other on fire? How about we just have another Anarchy in the Arena match with those guys? Let them just maim each other for an hour straight, and whoever's left breathing at the end, they'll be declared the new TV champion. Or whatever it is, the belt that Wardlow has. I don't even know at this point. Who cares? On the topic of guys that don't care, how's this for giving New Japan the middle finger? Hiroshi Tanahashi challenged MJF to a match at Forbidden Door, and MJF responded in the following segment by saying, "Nah, that doesn't work for me, brother." And, well, that was pretty much the extent of it. MJF doesn't work with guys that flip around in a rinky-dink outlaw promotion in Japan that nobody watches. Seems like a perfectly valid rationale for me. I have nothing else to add here. Nor do I have anything to add about Sky Blue versus Toni Storm for the AEW Women's World title that is not the same belt that Chris Statlander has. I always have to remind myself that they basically have 2 women's world champions in this company. 3, I guess, if you count the Ring of Honor women's title that may or may not still be a thing at this point. Who even knows anymore? Anyway, well, hey, at least we figured out what Jungle Jackass is going to be doing at Forbidden Door in a few weeks. Doing the job, brother. He's going to be a nice, solid job fodder for the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, Sonata. I'm sure Jackie Boy's frothing at the mouth as we speak. Can't wait to lose to a random New Japan guy that nobody's ever heard of, outside the Marks, who also just so happens to be their world champion. Which is really saying something at this point, isn't it? The idea that Sonata is the current IWGP Heavyweight Champion. How the fuck do we get here? It's called having no vision of foresight. Something New Japan's been accustomed to for decades. I mean, how else do you get 10 plus fucking years of Okada getting rammed up your sphincter hole? Guess it comes with the territory, though, where you get delusional internet marks praising it till kingdom come. And it's no wonder why the business is in the damn shape it's in. You let the inmates run the asylum, this is what you get. It's honestly how you get main events like the one we got on Dynamite this week. A match that... Well, it's funny because I always joke about how there are those matches that you see on paper and you're like, this match was exactly what I envisioned it being in my head. That pretty much sums up almost everything you need to know about the 6-man tag. Exxon, Moxley, Claudio, and Flat Wheel versus Hangman Page and the Beta Bucks. Every bad outlaw indie spot you could possibly expect. Pretty much got it here. Fake forearms and windmill punches galore, million dives and moves, everyone no-sells and kicks out of everything, zero ring psychology, no tags in or out, despite it being a tag match of some sort. Oh, and it went forever and a decade. Forgot to mention that too. It was... I mean, honestly, at this point, the conversation can really be chalked up to it was an elite BCC match. Doesn't matter how you phrase it. You can use the same descriptions interchangeably. Their matches are always the same. The only difference is you may occasionally throw in the, oh yeah, Moxley bladed cliche. I'm surprised he didn't bleed here. Honestly, it was kind of ironic in a way how they chose to air this match as the Dynamite main event, just 4 days out from the Collision debut, where the expectation from a lot of people is we're bound to get less of this bullshittery on the Saturday shows going forward. This nonsensical, no psychology, no coherency, indie garbage wrestling. It's almost like this was deliberately done to make people understand if you continue to watch Dynamite on Wednesdays going forward, expect more shit like this. Which is exactly why I'm looking for any excuse to not have to continue to watch this Wednesday night debacle programming in the future. It's like they're daring me to actively boycott this show now. And of course, after the Elite won, they do all the post-match stuff where there are like 8,000 run-ins and a million different things happening. It's all flying by so quickly you can barely have enough time to digest anything. Among those random things that happen in rapid succession, allow for me to rattle off a couple of them. We had the TV return of Eddie Kingston to run down and make the save for the Elite. But of course it can never be that simple because of course they have to plug their 50 Shades of Grey booking where Kingston is still hesitant to attack Moxley because they have a checkered past. Close allies at one point in time. So Kingston fights off all the heels except for the one guy in the heel group that he's apparently still friends with. And of course, none of that matters at the end of the day because Kingston ends up getting punked out by Takeshita from behind. Kingston rolls out to the floor. We never see him again. Just a total throwaway here. Also, Omega could run down at the end, so he and Takeshita could do some fake-ass looking video game stuff for a minute. And then while that's going on, as I directly wrote down in my notes here, some random guy in a generic white t-shirt hits the ring and attacks Omega with a super kick. No joke. I thought it was a mark that jumped the guardrail. And just so happened to apparently throw a wicked thrust kick. But nah, it turns out it was an actual wrestler. It's Will Ospreay, the guy that we already knew was facing Omega at Forbidden Door for the IWGP United States Heavyweight title, because, of course, we already fucking knew that. Duh. What, you guys living under a rock or something? How did you not already know? Everybody knows that match was happening. Yeah. Yeah, this show really fucking sucks, everybody. I just want to let you all know that Tony's a horrible booker. The Elite and BCC are the worst factions of all time. This Elite BCC feud is the worst feud of all time. And I can't wait for the Saturday show. Moreover, I can't wait for CM Punk to just go out there and roast all these goddamn numbskulls on the stick. Sam, what you see, folks, is not a mirage. This is AEW Collision, where we had to create a new Saturday show because the Elite have done such astronomical damage to this product in the last 8 months, we needed to launch a completely new TV show just to give us any signs of hope. Because Lord knows you're ever going to get it with that Wednesday show. Not with those rugrats running the ship. That's what I'm hoping Punk says. But he'll probably just go out there and say he's ready to pursue the AEW World Championship again. And I'll say, good enough for me. Anyway, while I have a minute here, I want to quickly talk about this before we go to the retro part. AEW Collision is this Saturday. As of this recording, tomorrow night, basically. I normally don't take the time to do card previews. Certainly I don't take the time to do them for TV shows. But they've been incrementally throwing out TV matches during their show rundowns on Dynamite. And while I can't confirm whether or not this is the full card for the Saturday show, it's kind of a jumbled bag here. You got some stuff that I'm genuinely interested in seeing, and then you have a couple things here that I'm left scratching my head on. I'm going to use the 411 Mania website here just because I had it up while I was browsing earlier. I'm sure AEW has the card on their website, but here's what's officially been announced for Collision as of this Wednesday. In the TV main event, we have Samoa Joe, Juice Robinson, and Jay White versus FTR and CM Punk. 6-man tag. And I already talked about them announcing this match a week or so ago. I had some heavy criticisms about the idea of this match on paper. Strictly the issue of the fact that Punk's first match back with the company in almost 9 months, and he's getting wedged into the middle of a 6-man tag. It still kind of seems odd to me. I think it would have been more beneficial for them to showcase him in a one-on-one match so you don't get large portions where he's just standing on the apron doing nothing. You know, if the idea is we're concerned he may not be ready to work a singles match on his own for a long period of time, then hey, here's a novel idea. You know what you can do? Have him go out there and wrestle a short 5-minute squash. Let's be frank. People are going to be more interested in hearing Punk talk right now than they are seeing him work long competitive matches. To me, this seemed like a spot better reserved for Ricky Starks. You have him take Punk's place and those guys can do the 6-man tag, and then Punk can do an in-ring promo segment, maybe a quick squash win to put him over and show that he's ready to go. Boom! You're off to the races. You got 2 different matches, and at least you get Ricky Starks on the Collision show. But instead they did this. I have some reservations about it. Not saying it won't be a good match. It could be a blowaway match for all we know. But again, is it the best usage of CM Punk after him being out of action for almost half a year? Wouldn't have been the first thing I booked for him. I also have some reservations about Wardlow versus Luchasaurus for the TNT title. This is all hilarious to me. Okay, going over the timeline for a second. So they rush into doing Wardlow versus Christian at Double or Nothing, also making it a ladder match for no apparent reason. And now that the feud is continuing, they're doing Wardlow versus the Dinosaur in a regular match on TV. Probably would have been more valuable to reverse those decisions and consider doing Wardlow versus Christian in the regular match on TV, where you know Christian might be able to actually get something out of Wardlow, instead of needlessly throwing them out there to do a garbage match on pay-per-view like they did. But what do I know? I mean, this match can go either way, honestly. It'll either be Wardlow smash and he moves on to feud with somebody else, or they try and stretch this thing out to 15 minutes and it'll be a nightmare scenario for all parties involved. Knowing the way Tony books, I'm betting on the latter. Also apparently on the card, there's going to be a Miro match at some point. I'm perfectly down for that. I was wondering what the hell happened with him and Thunder Rosa after that random backstage pre-tape like a month ago. I know that seems like ancient history at this point, but y'all remember that? When they just randomly showed up and waltzed into Tony's broom closet office? Then we never saw them again? They were never mentioned again? It's been radio silent ever since? It was the most bizarre thing in the world. But at least we know Miro is scheduled to appear on Collision. Hopefully that'll be a regular thing and he doesn't get sucked back into purgatory again for months at a time. And speaking of Thunder Rosa, boy, it would have been nice to maybe see her get a featured match on the show instead of the girls' match they announced already. It was a Sky Blue and Willow Nightingale versus Toni Storm and Ruby No-Go. Really? We're still doing this? Guess Collision won't be garnering my attention for the entirety of the 2 hours. Yeah, gonna be honest, man. I'm of the opinion that if they're gonna be doing girls' matches on Collision, they need to either be attraction matches once in a blue moon, or they need to keep that shit on Dynamite and Rampage. We already know the girls' segments are death TV for AEW's ratings. Every time the girls wrestle on Dynamite, the numbers either dip or they just drop off the face of the planet entirely. Especially when they're booking the underneath girls that nobody cares about. Why is this match even happening on Collision? If you're booking a girls match for the debut, the only match I would accept at this point is some kind of Thunder Rosa match. Because at least we know she can wrestle, and we haven't seen her in months, so it would come off as a special feature. I mean, let's be honest. Why would we pretend that this match is going to keep people invested? It's going to be nothing more than a designated piss break for anybody out there that actually values their time. Because if you've been seeing what they've been dishing out with the girls' segments on Dynamite, it's enough to make you want to leave the room and never come back. So I'll probably be skipping over this one. I am going to watch the show live on Saturday, so it's not like I'm going to fast forward or anything like that. I'll probably have it on in the background while I'm doing something else, but it's not something that interests me. And it's leaving me worried, frankly, that this might be a recurring thing on every Saturday show now, that the girls are going to have to get a featured match just because, whether or not it's warranted. I mean, I hope they don't do it, but knowing the track record of the way we are with modern wrestling now, it'll probably happen. And the final thing they have announced here is Buddy Matthews versus Andrade El Idolo. Another guy we haven't seen on the show in ages. And while I've certainly never been the biggest Andrade fan in the world, I've seen the guy have some good matches in NXT. He was their top world champion for a period of time. I'd like to maybe think that whatever problems were going on with him previously have been buried and forgotten about. But it's hard to ever know with AEW. Buddy Matthews? I mean, the House of Drex shit is horrible, and he's basically the unfortunate third wheel in that group. But I've seen the guy wrestle. He's very talented. I wish they had more of a game plan when they originally signed him to AEW instead of just sticking him with another pointless faction where he's just a guy instead of somebody that actually matters. But considering the styles the guys work, you know, I can see it being one of those barn burner modern matches that people get excited about because of all the athletically impressive spots they do. Provided they don't get too cute with the cartwheels and backflips, it could be a fun curtain jerker. I'll watch it for sure. I don't know what to expect for either guy after the fact in terms of booking. But we'll see. But it's a hit and miss thing. It's a grab bag. And moreover, here's the problem. This is going to be my concern about everything involving Collision going forward. If Tony Khan is going to be overseeing the booking, and he's not letting Punk provide any input on the stars that are being featured every week, what happens after this week's card? Are we going to see these guys as recurring talents on the shows going forward? Or is it going to be like Dynamite where 90% of them disappear and we don't see them again for another 6 to 8 months? I mean, they tease the idea of the whole split roster thing, so they really don't have any excuses for guys falling off the map at this point. Especially for guys like Miro and FTR and Punk, the guys that are going to be stable pieces for Collision. MJF included, whenever he shows up there. If you're working with a smaller talent pool, it's going to be more beneficial to keep those guys fresh and consistent. You'll be able to keep tabs on everybody a lot better. You'll see them get more screen time, more chances to wrestle steadily. I mean, those are going to be important things to take into account as the show develops. It's a strange kind of chutes and ladders game we're dealing with right now. There's stuff that I'm excited to see, and then there's stuff that I'm kind of lukewarm on. Kind of brings me back to where I was with Dynamite a little over a year ago when guys like Punk and MJF and FTR were still on the show consistently doing their thing. And then there was the rest of the dog and pony show. I'm really hoping Collision doesn't just become another one of those. Yeah, I might be able to tolerate it in the short, but it's going to start to become a problem if we start recognizing that Punk doesn't have as much political sway as we thought he would. And I don't mean that in terms of him running the ship on his own and Tony acting as his right-hand man. I'm just talking things as simple as letting Punk help Tony lay out the show and help him with formatting and give him pointers to help him out creatively. I mean, even if you're going to have Punk as an on-screen talent most weeks, doesn't mean you still can't have him working as an agent. Tony's already overextended his workload to the point where he cannot afford to be trying to book another TV show by himself. This is his opportunity to work exclusively with Punk and let him be a helping hand. Just the two of them. No elite, no sissy boy pansies in Tony's ear trying to sway him otherwise. Just no politics. Let Punk and Tony work things out and try to do a better television show than the Wednesday night Wild Wild West. Which at this point shouldn't be that hard. All right, so I think we're on the last string of shorter Crockett Saturday shows, at least for the time being. And that might be a considerable good thing as we look ahead to the 87 Bash Tour. They got a lot of promotion for those shows coming up in all the various cities they'll be running. And we saw a small sample of that last week where Jim Crockett was out there briefly plugging the Match Beyond. I was really holding back from trying to say that without a Dusty impression. I know the next time I'll do it, I won't be able to help myself. It's like whenever we talk about Starrcade 85, The Gathering. And you just can't say The Gathering without the Dusty tonal inflection. Speaking of Big Dust, he was a big centerpiece for this particular episode. Again, only about an hour in runtime, 40 minutes if you remove commercials. But the big story for this week was centered around the highlight of the Greensboro Coliseum match on June the 6th. The TV title match between Dusty and Tully, with $100,000 at stake. They were building up to that one for weeks. And this was the program where they were going to show us the exclusive footage. And they essentially spoiled the finish of it outright with his Ronnie Garvin promo. He was reflecting on the match briefly and basically talked about how Dusty got screwed. I was like, thanks, Ron. Glad I'm now inclined to stick around to watch the highlights. Nah, it really wasn't a big deal. What was a big deal, however, was Ronnie's shades. Probably among the goofiest set of sunglasses I've ever seen anybody wear on live broadcast television. I have no clue what these things were. They weren't aviators, that's for sure. Looked like something you would have gotten as a toy in one of those Happy Meals when you were a kid. And well, first off, I'm trying to withhold from laughing because I can't take anything seriously Ronnie's saying because of those ridiculous sunglasses. The other thing, too, and I don't know if I've ever addressed this with the studio shows, this is not the first time we've seen guys wear shades on camera to do promos. Like, Flair does it all the time. But at least in Flair's defense, he can get away with it because he's a heel. The whole wearing shades thing inside a studio to do promos, is that not the most douchebag thing you can imagine? Like, I just think, of all people we've seen wear sunglasses indoors for these Crockett segments, Dusty also among them in the conversation, it's like, it's not even a matter of it being cool. Everyone, babyface or heel, if you decide to wear sunglasses inside a venue under any circumstance, unless it's for a medical condition, you are automatically deemed douchebag. No questions. I've always been subconscious about wearing sunglasses indoors because of that very reason. The perception of looking like an asshole in public, trying to command attention in the room. Don't wear shades inside, people. And whatever you do, don't wear the ones Ronnie had on here. So from there, we go to our first TV match on the program. I believe the official Crockett debut for Kendall Windham. And boy howdy, Jim one line about this guy. You know, it's hilarious. I've heard so much about Kendall Windham in my life. And for the life of me, if you remove this one match, I don't think I could recall a single Kendall match that I've ever seen in my life. Certainly if I have, it's been years. I mean, this was probably sort of a resurgence in a lot of ways. I mean, going back and seeing footage of him again with modern eyes, because I've seen pictures of him. Boy, howdy. The one thing Corny always ragged on him about was the fact that he was painfully thin. Like rail thin. No body definition at all. And you know, at the same time, it's interesting to think that you go back and you see pictures of Kendall Windham in 1987 working TV matches in Crockett Promotions. The fact that even though he was part of the Windham family, they took one look at this guy and they gave him a featured spot in this company for a period of time. It's kind of crazy. They didn't push him to the moon or anything like that, but he was around for a while. They spotlighted him. And this was still back at a time where they had standards with the way guys looked on camera. I mean, you at least had to look like a reasonable athlete of some sort. Kendall Windham he was stretching it. Now, in all fairness, in comparison to today's business, Kendall Windham would probably be considered a standard heavyweight in comparison to most guys. The one thing he always had going in his favor was the height. The perks of coming from a big family with Blackjack and Barry, where, I mean, those guys were big, tall dudes. Even Mike Rotunda to an extent. I mean, Blackjack was probably, 6'7", 6'8"? Barry, we've talked about before, he was a good 6'5" or 6'6". I mean, he towered over most guys in this company. Kendall wasn't much shorter than Barry was. You know, I think they do some promos together on TV in the future, so we'll probably be able to spot the height difference, if there is any. But it's just funny how you go back and think to when Kendall Windham was considered too small in the scope of the wrestling business. Probably amounted to why he was only pushed to a certain level, because he was a fine athlete. Again, no body definition, no muscle tone, ridiculously scrawny. But he had some fire in there. And even by this point, he was pretty fresh to the business. Probably had like 3 or 4 years under his belt as a talent. So he was green in the sense of learning how to adapt to the bigger spotlight here in Crockett Promotions by 87. But he already had the basics. I mean, this was more or less their way of introducing him and letting us know, yeah, Kendall Windham's here. More new, hot, young prospects on the scene. Sort of part of that revamping period in Crockett where they were letting some of the older guard go and kind of trying to phase in some new guys. Yeah, the Kendalls, the Barrys, the Tim Horners, the Brad Armstrongs of the world. Young, clean, good-looking babyface types that were good athletes and marketable to the ladies. They were definitely on board with that. Just like the Rock and Roll Express. Good-looking, clean dudes that the ladies loved. Well, let me retract that slightly. I should say, good-looking and clean except for Robert Gibson's body hair. Anyhow, they said virtually nothing. They also addressed the Tully Dusty match. Ricky sounded like he was amped up on amphetamines, talking about 100 miles an hour, spewing out 1,000,000 words a minute. I could not keep up with the dialogue. The fingers were just not typing as fast as Ronnie was speaking. Really, though, wasn't anything important. And that was all basically a setup to air the Dusty Tully match from Greensboro. Actually, before that, I'm getting ahead of myself. We had the promotional package for the War Games match that will be happening in the Omni as part of the Bash. It was epically 1980s in every way imaginable. Jim Crockett ran down the stipulations and the rules, which, I'm not going to spend time talking about. You all know how War Games goes. There's only been like 8,000 variants of it in the last 20-odd-something years. Some of which have been done better than others, depending on which promotion you were watching. And like the whole video package with the dramatic overview and the effects of the War Games cage, it's the exact model WWF ripped off years later for their pay-per-view promotions. The opening videos with the ominous music and the dark, mysterious undertones. The guy here, I'm not sure it was who they had doing the verbiage, but it sounded like that giant Olmec head from that Nickelodeon game show back in the 90s. That was like the first thing that came to my mind hearing him. I was waiting for him to talk about the Shrine of the Silver Monkeys. No one's going to have a fucking clue what I'm talking about if you're under the age of 30. And in that case, I apologize. The Gen Zers just won't get it. Anyhow, getting past the War Game stuff, then came the highlights of the Dusty Tully match in Greensboro. And what a highlight reel it was. There's so much to unpack here. I'll start off with this. If you've seen any Tully Dusty match in your entire life, you'll know what great chemistry they had together. The perfect villain and the perfect protagonist paired together, and the fans ate it up every time. But this particular match in the Coliseum was a special occasion. It's for the TV title. Obviously, you had the worked-in stipulation, too, where Magnum was out on the floor holding on to the $100,000, as per the contract stipulations. He was basically there to ensure that Tully didn't just outright walk off with the money, because, well, that's the exact kind of thing you would expect a Tully Blanchard to do. So, well, that wasn't the only reason Magnum was out there. He also may or may have not passed a walking cane off to Dusty at one point so he could hit Tully over the knee with it. But we'll just keep that under the radar. Yeah, Dusty's basically out there working over Tully's injured leg, wrapping it around the outside guardrail. Fans are screaming themselves with excitement watching Tully try to hobble away from Dusty, but keeps getting cut off. It's basically just a one-sided onslaught until they do a spot on the floor where Dusty's got Tully tied up in the figure four. And when Tommy Young goes out to try and break them up by himself, JJ runs over and kicks Dusty in the head with that devastating dress shoe. I forget what they call it. It's not an alligator shoe, but it's got that really heavy sole on the bottom. And you got Tully going after Dusty's knee and working him over for the heat portion. They're, well, they said they hit the 15-minute mark in the match right before the break, so looking back, they essentially aired almost the entirety of the match. Probably only shaved off about the first 10 or so minutes. And they come back with Dusty trying to milk the comeback. They end up doing a double collision spot where both guys run into each other's bellies. Considering what Tully was running into, I thought he probably would have taken the worst of it. And they end up building to their Dusty finish. The classic Dusty finish. So Dusty hits Tully with a slingshot from the ring apron. But as he goes for the count, Tommy Young initially counts the pinfall, not realizing that Tully's foot was under the bottom rope. Or was it? Put an asterisk next to that for a minute. So the fans pop, thinking Dusty initially won. And, well, it's definitely got a little hairy with what they did here. So I'll try my best to recount and explain every detail to the best of my ability. Here's what I believe happened in sequential order. Right after the bell rang, J.J. Dillon went up and, for lack of better terms, got the bag. He took off running with it in very comedic fashion while Dusty was in hot pursuit. And he's chasing JJ out into the parking lot area. The problem, however, is that Tommy Young had already restarted the match when Dusty took off because he saw that Tully's foot was under the rope. So while Magnum's standing there aghast about the whole situation, Tommy Young ends up counting out Dusty. And he awards the match back to Tully. Meanwhile, Dusty's still in the parking lot trying to hunt down the slimeball Dillon. Doesn't end up finding him. And unfortunately, by the time Dusty makes his way back down to ringside, the heels have all powdered. So Dusty's flummoxed, going, "Where'd he go?" In reference to Tully. And then we get the best part. Because Dusty is finally clued into what happened. He realizes that the match was restarted and Tully won. So Dusty gets on the house microphone and says the following several quotes. "Jim Crockett, I want my fucking money right now." And "Jim Crockett, you'll get my fucking money from that son of a bitch right now." And of course, due to all the censoring, as you would imagine for TV, the only thing we, the viewers, hear is "Jim Crockett," followed by about 10 seconds of beep. I was dying listening to this. It's totally Dusty in every way imaginable. Him going off the cuff and just totally not giving a shit. But here's the best part. You can totally identify with Dusty in this situation. This was not an AEW situation where guys were looking for any excuse to say the word shit on TV randomly because they think it sounds cool. No. Dusty got fucked. We all knew it. He has every rationale to be pissed about it. You know, it's one thing for the match to be restarted because Tommy saw that Tully's foot was under the rope. It's another thing for the heels to outright dine and dash with the cash. JJ just swooped in from under Magnum's nose, grabbed the bag of money, took off like a fucking kid on roller skates. You've never seen an old man run so fast in your life. He took off faster than Joe Biden following a press conference. And obviously Dusty had no idea about the match being restarted because he was already halfway out of the building trying to go after JJ. He had no idea. So he got fucked on both sides. You know, and they had the follow-up footage where Tony Schiavone is going into the babyface locker room and trying to get Dusty's side of what happened. That basically went about as expected. We did get a very somber moment, though, where Magnum apologized for letting Dusty down because he lost the money. And, you know, Dusty basically grabbed him and gave him a big old hug. It was sad. Tears were shed. And as for Tommy Young, boy, does that man have some splaining to do. See, we mentioned how the match was started over because Tully's foot was under the rope. Here's the problem, though. It was long after Tommy Young had already counted the pin for Dusty. This was not the ref missing a blatant foot under the rope and then waving off the call. Dusty beat Tully clean. Tully slid his foot under the rope well after the pin was already counted. And they show a replay of it to confirm, clear as day, Tully was pinned, and he had his foot under the rope well after the pinfall. So in other words, Tommy Young done gone and fucked up. Blew that call. And Jim Crockett made sure to let Tommy know that he's in the doghouse for it. Now, in all fairness, Tommy played it up as best he could. Basically acknowledges, all right, yeah, I see the footage. I know what I did wrong. But since we don't use instant replays in wrestling, I have to stand by my decision. And Jim basically lets everybody know that they're going to look into the situation. Tommy Young will be under strict investigation by the board to determine whether or not he should receive any fiscal ramifications for this major blunder. And meanwhile, Tommy's looking on like he just got scolded by the school principal. This was, well, everything about it was phenomenal. This was probably one of the better Dusty finishes you'll ever see. And we talk so often in this business about how Dusty's finishes get a bad reputation for being way too excessive and overbooked. Granted, this was overbooked in terms of the way it was laid out. There was a lot going on here. But I think people often misconstrue the idea that overbook means bad. Far from it. In this scenario, it worked. You could follow every detail of what happened. The story at the end was Dusty won. We all knew it. We all saw it. And the only reason Tully kept the money and the title was due to a bad ref call. Some of which wasn't entirely his fault. And in other avenues, some of it may have been. I mean, if he hadn't immediately jumped on restarting the match after Dusty left, he wouldn't have been counted out. So this all worked. Great stuff. Dusty booking at his finest. The good kind. And the story continues with the babyface locker room being miffed about the whole TV title situation. And Nikita Koloff out there venting his frustrations about it. Only briefly, though, because he had some other matter to talk about, including the fact that his U.S. title match with Lex Luger is signed, sealed, and soon to be delivered. And, well, then he basically asked for Tony to regurgitate the rules of War Games because I guess Nikita wasn't paying attention earlier. Either that or he legitimately had no idea what the rules were and he needed clarification again. Tony Schiavone, trying to simplify and break down the rules of War Games. Try as he might, I don't know if he entirely succeeded. Back to the ring for more action, though. Jimmy Garvin wrestled Rick Sullivan, still accompanied by the Bodacious Precious. Thank you, David. Match went 1 minute. Garvin won with a brainbuster. At which point Tony says, and I quote, "What an athlete." And I responded with, "He hit one singular move, Tony." If there was ever a match that did not demonstrate Garvin's athletic ability, it was this one. These commentators, they kill me. Kill me. Then we went back to the booth for a Midnight's promo. Jim Cornette's all excited that he managed to survive the Garvin Gauntlet. He survived all of the cage matches and left relatively unscathed. And now he is officially retired from in-ring competition. He also informed us that the Rock and Roll Express are some combination of the following things: cowards, trash, maggots, fraidy cats, dregs of society. I mean, he ran down the whole verbiage. I was starting to think by the end of it, Corny doesn't really seem to like Ricky and Robert all that much. But perhaps that's just me speculating. So, well, then we had Flair out for a promo. And up to this point, we pretty much had everybody on the show talk about the grave miscarriage of justice that occurred with that TV title match in Greensboro. And then we had Ric Flair out there talking about it, putting over Tully and talking about how great life is. I was like, what a heel. Says the Horsemen are riding high headed into the Omni on July 4th. War Games is coming. And when it comes to that environment, it's all about the blood, sweat, and guts. To which I then thought, sounds like Moxley's having a ball just thinking about it. Guts. Blood. Sweat. Yeah. That's good shit. I don't know why my Moxley impression is the same as my Vince impression, but maybe they think alike. I don't know. With Moxley, he'd be more on board with eating the guts and drinking the bones and eating the blood and all that good stuff. Anyway, what the hell are we talking about here? Oh yeah, the Ric Flair promo. Yeah, he didn't really say anything. It was all just kind of a lead into the six-man tag, which main event of the show. Luger, Tully, and Arn versus Cougar Jay, Mike Force, and Chance McQuaid, with Flair playing coked out of his mind cheerleader on the outside. I should also mention, not that this is a shock to those people watching, the studio fans were very pro-Horsemen here. If the goal was to make the Horsemen the most hated men in all of professional wrestling after having just fucked Dusty out of the TV title and the money, epic failure. Fans were way too pro-Horsemen here, giving them a standing ovation for literally just doing nothing but breathing. Anyhow, I mean, much like every other match on the show, it was kept relatively short due to time constraints. So you basically just had the Horsemen tagging in and out constantly, hitting like one or two moves and then tagging out to the next guy. Flair was out on the floor being Flair. And after Arn hit the double A spinebuster on Force, Luger picked him up and racked him for the submission. And well, then we had Tully and the Horsemen at the booth for another 2 minutes, just ranting and putting themselves over for a job well done. Talking about how everybody's bitching and moaning about Dusty getting screwed when the reality is that the record books will always indicate that Tully beat Dusty. And I mean, you can't really lie or deny those stats. Tully's got a valid point. And it's kind of all there was to it. Everybody here was fantastic. Deafening in the room with all the people screaming. They almost drowned out Tully Blanchard, which I didn't think was humanly possible. Like, if you've ever heard Tully cut a promo on this show, he's usually able to project and get over really well. But he was struggling here. It was very loud in the studio when he was trying to talk. And that was more or less the Superstation show for the week. The highlight of which was hearing Dusty motherfuck just about everybody in Greensboro. And when you take into account that was half the show right there, the rest of it was just kind of status quo. I mean, even the job guys this week didn't get enough time to royally fuck anything up. The squashes had virtually nothing of note going on, and I'm usually one to sit here and try to nitpick every last detail of the TV squashes. There's always entertainment to be had. But this one was kind of just a paint-by-numbers TV show with one major talking point. But next week we should be back to a normal 2-hour block. So we'll probably have substantially more to talk about next week. And that kind of turns us over to this episode of World Class. Speaking of having nothing to talk about. Well, that's not entirely true, actually. The matches weren't anything to write home about. But there were a few announcements on this one worth discussing. Also, in case you forgot, the Freebirds and the Von Erichs are still feuding. Yeah, I know. I had to write that one down. Totally would have escaped me otherwise. Anyway, well, we started this week with another encore feature, but I don't believe we've actually reviewed this match, so it was a fresh watch. This one, I think, was filmed in Fort Worth. It's the Iceman teaming up with Buck Zumhoff to take on the Super Ds. Oh, pardon me. I almost forgot. Rock and roll Buck Zumhoff. That distinction must be made. Also, I believe, as Mercer set up prior to the tape footage, a completely random mask versus title match. So I presume this was filmed after the Parade of Champions show when the Super Ds dropped the belts initially. And they started this one off from about the 5-minute mark. So we were still kind of in the feeling out process at the beginning. They did a comedy spot early on where Buck had one of the heels in an arm wrench, and when the one Super D went to tag the other one, Buck actually pulled him back to a neutral position, so the other Super D who was leaning over the ropes just ended up taking a pratfall into the ring. That was actually a cool little spot. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And it's such a simple idea. I'm surprised we don't see it more often. There were actually a few little fun comedy spots they did here where the heels were made out to look like jackasses. A little later on, they had the Iceman try to ram one of the Super Ds into the turnbuckle, and after the Super D fired up and no-sold it, Iceman just headbutted him, and the Super D just took a bump. For the record, too, if you've been watching these Dallas reviews for a while, the Super Ds are totally interchangeable. Like, you'll hear them constantly referred to as Super Ds 1 and 2. I never know which one's fucking which. Like, I never knew enough about Scott and Bill Irwin to know which one was under the mask, or which one was under which mask. I mean, they both had practically the same physique, so it's not like you could really tell their bodies apart. Anyway, so the heels eventually cut off the faces and worked them over. As typically what happens in these kinds of longer tag matches, the heels wind up getting a double heat segment. Started working over the Iceman for a while until he got a sunset pin attempt on one of the heels. Buck ended up getting the hot tag so he can make a momentary comeback. And after he got cut off, things broke down with all four guys. They do a spot where the Iceman runs in and attacks one of the heels while he's trying to double team Buck behind Bronco's back. And while he's dealing with the Iceman, they do the old twin magic gimmick where the Super D runs in and pushes the other one out to the floor so he can steal the pin illegally. And that winds up handing the belts back to the Super Ds. And they took that moment to try and cut to the crowd to film some reactions. Basically, we had a 50-50 split. Some people were booing and chucking popcorn toward the ring. The other half was sitting there cross-legged, either smiling or showing complete disinterest. I wrote down, those must have been the hardcore fans in 1984. And, well, this is a total classic wrestling spot. Afterwards, even though the heels won, fuck the stipulations, the Iceman runs in and pulls off one of the heels' masks anyway. I think it was Bill Irwin, even though we only got a shot from the back before Skandar Akbar threw a towel over his head. But I always love that. The heels win by cheating, but they still must be humiliated in the end, because they've always got to send the fans home happy. So, of course, they were going to remove their masks anyway, regardless of the finish outcome. Actually, come to think of it, they ended up removing both of the Super D's masks. And that all tied in with Akbar's follow-up sit-down interview with Mercer, where he basically acknowledged the identity of Scott and Bill Irwin, talked about how their identity was sacred to them until those no-good dastardly scumbags, the Iceman and Buck Zumhofe, took it away from them. And he talks about how they will feel the wrath of Devastation Inc., just like the Iceman felt the wrath of Chris Jericho's Fireball. Because he's a wizard, bitch. And, well, then we had one of those relatively awkward yet funny moments where Mercer's trying to pick the General's brain, asking what's next on the agenda for Devastation Inc. And after Akbar talks about how they're gunning for the Texas Heavyweight title, there's a slight pause. Akbar turns to look back at Bill Mercer. It's ominously quiet for all of about 5 seconds before Mercer finally goes, "Well, all right then. We'll be right back." I almost thought Bill was channeling his inner Vince McMahon, where you have to have a 30-second pause in between camera cuts while the boys just stand there motionless. It's what we call quality television, milking the tension in the room. You know what wasn't quality television, however? Killer Khan versus Pat Rose. Holy shit, this match bombed. And it went forever, which is even worse. The best part was watching Terry Gordy's reactions on the floor. Beyond that, we had about 5 excruciating minutes of choking, high-pitched squealing, and mediocre commentary. The bulk of which was Bill Mercer casually talking about the NWA World Heavyweight Championship switching hands over in Japan. I mean, we all remember the Kerry title reign was short-lived. And in fact, it was so short-lived, the title was flipped back over to Flair in Japan. They chalked it up to a controversial finish where Kerry's feet were under the ropes, but, yeah. That was how they announced Kerry dropping the strap. Got 2 minutes of TV recognition during a segment that had nothing to do with Kerry or Flair. Whatever. You can't win them all. Killer Khan won. It was not a win for people watching. And that took us to another brief squash on the show. This one was Gino Hernandez versus Rick Hazard. Not making that name up, by the way. I believe Hazard was spelled with 2 Z's. Just to let you know, the name was trademarked. Kind of like the Khan squash, though. This is just another showcase piece for Gino. Give him a chance to get some heat and be a dick to the crowd. And it worked in some instances because when Rick got to make a short comeback, the fans were popping for Gino's bumps. Match only went a few minutes, and Gino won with a driving elbow to the back of the head. It was an odd finish. But he's boasting afterwards, holding up the American Heavyweight title. That was also probably worth mentioning here. The fact that he was the American Heavyweight Champion, which I may have already talked about the last time we saw Gino wrestle, but I mean, for the life of me, I can't remember. Anyway, that was all that. And then we had the main event. And we touched on the whole Kerry situation earlier, but here we actually got to hear Kerry discuss what happened. The whole controversy surrounding him losing the World Heavyweight title. This was so bizarre. Here is the extent of what Kerry said. Now, this is not verbatim what he said in his quote, but a general summary. Yeah, you know, Bill, it's whatever. I lost. I'm not here to make excuses. Fuck it. It's done. I'm over it. I'm ready to move on. I'm not being facetious. That was almost word for word what Kerry said. Literally equivalent to something I would say if I left my cell phone sitting on the park bench. I know. Just a phone. No biggie. I can get a new one. That's pretty much how Kerry sold losing the world title. The most prestigious belt in the world. Treated it like it was a total throwaway. Now he's turning his attention back to the six-man belts alongside Kevin and Mike. Family first. Because as we remember from the David Memorial event, the Bad Street USA tag match saw the Von Erichs win the belts from the Freebirds. And per the stipulations, Fritz was allowed to pass along his position to Kerry as part of that trio. So now Kerry's ready to turn his focus over to that. And fuck the world title, basically. Alrighty then. Not the promo I was expecting from Kerry, but hey, he wasn't known for blowing a gasket back in the day. None of the Von Erichs were known for that, now that I think of it. They were all very low-key and chill. It's kind of funny how you think, well, the guy's got a legit excuse to go after the title again. Instead, Kerry's just like, whatever. It's just, it is what it is, man. No, I mean, he was a hippies guy, I guess you could say, so it would make sense. Raw rolls on. That's the classic line we needed there. And so does our main event. Rolling right along into our TV main event for the week. It is Kevin and Mike versus Buddy Roberts and Terry Gordy. Also, Michael Hayes is a jerk. Just in case you needed confirmation on that matter. He got on the house mic and basically made fun of dumb old stupid Texas. At which point, Sandy Cheeks hit the ring with a bull rope and started choking out Hayes with it. Now I think I understand why that SpongeBob joke was so funny. I also like David Manning giving Michael Hayes a designated timeout. Tells him that he can stay at ringside, but he has to sit in the corner and behave himself. Like a good soldier. Yeah. Good call, David. I'm sure that won't backfire in a hurry. The wrestling was fine here. The audio was all kinds of whacked out. I have no idea what happened to the feed, but the crowd miking during this thing was just horrible. Like, they were just totally faded into the background. Mercer was audible, but the crowd just sounded like static white noise the entire time. I mean, they just kind of worked it like a standard Freebird Von Erich match. Nothing we probably haven't already covered a gazillion times before. Mike was in there a little longer than normal, so, they definitely tried to give him a little more ring exposure here. Hayes was out on the floor engaging with Kerry. Heels got to work over Mike for the heat. Kevin was able to make a comeback after Buddy missed a running charge in the corner and got hung up in the ropes. They ended up having Hayes do a run-in spot behind the ref's back, which prompted Kerry to start giving chase. And after both guys just blatantly got into the ring and started fighting, Bronco called for the bell and threw the match out. I presume a double disqualification. I don't know if that was ever officially announced or not. And you kind of know the drill with the aftermath. Heels try to jump the faces. Faces make the comeback on the heels and send them powdering. In this case, it was a miscommunication spot where Killer Khan was supposed to hit one of the Von Erichs with a gimmick, but he ended up clocking Gordy instead. But, Von Erich stands strong. You know how that one goes. Kind of an episode where there wasn't a whole lot going on outside the major bombshell of Kerry losing the NWA World Heavyweight title. And even so, they just glossed over it like it was nothing. I mean, we all kind of assumed, though, that the Kerry title reign was going to be short-lived anyway, so it's probably not all that surprising that they glossed over it so quickly. I don't know if they would have the ability to ever play any of the footage, since technically the video aired in Japan. Not sure if they would have gotten the rights to air anything on their shows. Maybe that was sort of an under-the-radar way of saying it was actually a phantom title switch and the Japan thing was just a mirage. Could be anything, honestly. But the Von Erichs are back to the six-man title picture, and now there's some minor story development here and there. The Super Ds are basically done away with, so I'm sure they're going to get phased out of the equation. Not sure where that leaves the rest of Devastation Inc. I mean, they still have the missing link hanging in the background, unfortunately. That'll probably not make for good times. But we'll see how things shape up for later in the summer. A little bit of a change of pace in the booking department, so it's good. Freshen up the scene a little bit, launch some new programs, and moving forward. Forward and onward. Onward and backward. Backward and sideways, and honestly, I don't remember how that phrase goes. Maybe we should back our way out of this show before I bury myself even further. All right, so what do we got upcoming this Monday? Retro Raw for sure. SmackDown and AEW Collision, I think, is what we have on the radar. No swerves this time around, I promise. Should make for a decently lengthy Monday show. You got a lot to talk about then. That AEW Collision show, I keep going back and forth with it. I want to stay cautiously optimistic because I really would like for that show to succeed. It looks promising in some domains, and other domains I'm still kind of iffy. But we'll see. I have more hope for that show than I do with Dynamite at this point. And we'll just kind of follow the train and see where it takes us. So, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll catch you on the flip side. Keep posted on Monday. Peace out.